The Pacific Northwest is a hotspot for paranormal occurrences. There is everything from missing person cases to UFOs and even Bigfoot sightings. Now, there was this woman named Tessa. Tessa was from Seattle, Washington. She said many years ago, she lived with this roommate in an apartment in downtown Seattle. Well, this one particular night, she gets off of work really late. It's about 1 in the morning. She arrives to her apartment complex. She goes in the door, goes down the hallway, and when she gets to their apartment, she unlocks the door. As she enters in, she can hear her roommate crying. And now she figured something was going on with her boyfriend and she didn't want to be intrusive, so she just goes to her room and closes the door. Well, the crying started to get louder and louder, and it was like she was wailing. She felt like bad for her, but she also didn't want to bother her and, get into her business. So she put on some music. Well, eventually it was really, really bad, and she felt like maybe I should just reach out to her and see if she's okay. So she puts on some clothes. She gets ready to open her door to go out into the hallway. All of a sudden, her phone starts ringing, and it's her roommate. So she picks it up and is like, "Hey, you know, I'm sorry I didn't come in sooner, but like, is everything okay with you? I've been hearing you cry." And her roommate's like, "What are you talking about? I'm not at the house. I'm at my boyfriend's. I was just going to ask you if you could take something out of the fridge." And Tessa's like, "What do you mean? I've been hearing you cry for like the last 20, 30 minutes. And she's like, "Listen, get out of the house now because I am not there. That is someone else." So Tessa runs out the front door and goes all the way out to the parking lot and gets in her car. And eventually her roommate comes there with her boyfriend. And the boyfriend goes up to the apartment and he goes inside. Now, Tessa and her roommate are waiting outside of the apartment door in the hallway. He goes through the whole place. He doesn't find anything. All of a sudden, the front door opens up and this dog comes running out of the apartment down the hallway. And they're like, "How in the world, like, how did that dog get into our apartment?" And the boyfriend comes out and he's like, it's really weird. I searched your entire place, all the windows, everything's locked up. There's no one inside. But when I went in his girlfriend's bedroom, he said there was a dog in there. And as he opened the door, the dog ran into the hallway and ran to the front door. So when he opened the front door, it ran out. They never could find that dog. They had no idea how it got there, but they couldn't figure out what caused that crying and how that dog got inside that apartment. 3 years ago, this man named Edgar moves to the Washington area. He purchases this property on 27 acres, and he's in this very remote region of the Pacific Northwest. Now, he reaches out to me and says, 3 years ago, when I bought this property, I started to notice the woods behind my house are some kind of portal. And every night, something comes out of these woods. Now, the story starts in October of 2002. He purchases this beautiful home on 27 acres of forested area. He said after the first couple of weeks, he was in his backyard and he started to notice this strange humming sound. It seemed to be coming from the woods. When he'd be inside his home, when he'd be inside the front, he could hear this sound just continuously. And it was like a light hum. And it was just repetitive over and over again, all day, all night. So eventually he decides, I'm going to track down this sound because it is driving me insane. He starts to notice that there is this very weird tree in the woods behind his house. And the best way to describe it is if a tree was flipped upside down and put into the ground, because this tree had roots that were growing out from the top of the tree where the branches and leaves would normally be. And he noticed that this sound was coming from within the tree. So he goes and he gets a hatchet and he goes out to this tree and he tries to cut it down, except the hatchet breaks. He goes and he gets a chainsaw. Once again, tries to cut the tree down. The chainsaw breaks. And he starts to realize something about this tree prohibits him from cutting it down. And that's when stuff started to get really weird. So one night he was in his kitchen and he saw some movement in his backyard. So that's when he opened the back door. He looked out and he sees his deceased uncle, who he said he later had a conversation with for 3 hours. And on a regular basis, family members who have passed away are visiting him coming out of these woods at night. He starts seeing strange lights and shadows moving outside the backyard of his house into these woods. So one day his dog runs out into the woods, takes off, and for several weeks he couldn't find his dog. One day the dog returns, except his behavior has changed. He's very angry, very aggressive, and he tries to bite this man. So eventually he puts this dog down. However, this dog would continuously come back at night out of those woods. So another time he brought his friend over and he starts telling him about the things that are happening in these woods behind his house. So him and his friend go and investigate and he shows him this tree. And then instantly his friend just disappeared right in front of his eyes. He searches this area for hours. He cannot find his friend anywhere. And just mysteriously as he vanished, he reappears behind another tree. And when he asks his friend, what happened to you? Like, where did you go? His friend is confused because he feels like he had only been gone for a few seconds. However, hours of time have passed. And all of these weird things kept happening in his backyard. And even still up to today, about 2 weeks ago, he was sitting in his kitchen at night and he happened to look out the window. And he said that's when he sees this red tricycle that he had on his back porch that he was going to give to his nephew. It started moving by itself, riding around the back porch. And he said he doesn't know what's going on, but he thinks that there is some kind of portal behind his house. We've got a recent Bigfoot sighting here in Peoria, Illinois. Now, this happened about 2 days ago when it was reported that in January, a couple of hikers happened to be walking on the floodplain trail at Wildlife Prairie Park when they stumbled upon some very large footprints. Not only did they find footprints, but they also found some type of fur. They managed to take pictures of the footprints and the fur, but what's interesting is not too far from this area, there was a recent Bigfoot sighting near Canton. We've also had 2 documented Bigfoot sightings very close to this area near Jubilee College State Park, and it's registered with the bfro.net. So my question is, with these frequencies of Bigfoot sightings in the area, is Peoria, Illinois becoming a hotspot for Bigfoot? Now, I wanted to share a personal encounter I had about a year, maybe a year and a half ago. I was actually north of Peoria at this park late one night with my 2 dogs. And basically, at this time, I was bringing the dogs out and just letting them run around at night. Now, mind you, these are 2 90-pound large breed dogs. And so we were hiking this trail. They were running off ahead in front of me. And we heard this very loud vocalization, which scared the dogs and actually caused them to run in the opposite direction back towards the vehicle. So, what do you think? Is Peoria, Illinois becoming a new hotspot for Bigfoot? 2 of the most terrifying Bigfoot encounters I've heard of come from law enforcement officers. Now, this first story takes place in Alaska. There was a highway patrolman who was working one night driving down the highway when he gets a call from dispatch telling him he needed to go out to this residence because there was some sort of disturbance. They were hearing a woman screaming. So he starts speeding down this road. As he's driving, he has to swerve out of the way because there's something very large in the middle of the road. As he slams on his brakes and he looks back, he sees this 8-foot tall, hairy bipedal creature, and it is carrying something over its shoulder. And as this thing runs into the woods and he gets a glimpse of it from behind, he can see this whitish, grayish color fur hanging down its back. So for a few moments, he's kind of in awe, just like, what happened? But he knows he has to go out to this call. So he, gets his composure and he starts making his way down the highway and he gets to this house. When he pulls in, he notices the front door has been kicked in. And when he goes inside, there is a clear sign of some kind of struggle. There are broken lamps, tables flipped over, and there are scratch marks going from the living room out the front door. So he starts looking around this place for evidence when he stumbles upon a picture on the wall. And that's when he sees this old woman with gray, long hair down to her knees. And it clicks to him. That thing that he's seen in the road was carrying that woman. Now, this second story takes place in Montana. There was this law enforcement officer who said he, was working late one night. And he said there was this guy that all the locals knew. He was, keen on the drink. And he was always getting into trouble, and he always had, these crazy stories. He said one night he showed up to the station, and he starts going on about this man in a gorilla costume who keeps staring at him at his house. And, he thinks at the time this man has just, had too much to drink. So he tells him, you need to go home, you need to get some sleep. And otherwise we can, put you in the jail cell. So the guy leaves. A couple days later, he gets another call. And they say, hey, we've seen this man in a gorilla suit running down the highway. So he starts to think, okay, maybe this guy was telling the truth. So he makes his way out to this guy's house, who lived like on the outskirts of town. When he pulls into his house, he knocks on the door because he can't find this man. As he goes around to the back, he notices this tree has broken in half. And there is that man impaled on top of this tree that is, broken at like 7-8 foot tall. And he said whatever did it had to, been really strong, and it was done with a lot of force. So, he calls in the coroner and everybody comes, and eventually they ruled it this freak accident. They said that this man had climbed up in the tree, and because of the cold temperatures, the tree broke, and he happened to fall right onto the, top of, or the pointed part of this tree and impale himself. But this man, this law enforcement officer, he thought to himself, it's just very odd that he had said he's seen this man in a gorilla suit staring at him, and now he's impaled in this tree. There was this man named Jim. Now, Jim grew up in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina, and he said he was the oldest of 5 brothers and sisters, and they lived in this older home situated in the middle of the woods, surrounded by the mountains. Now, he said this one particular night, his father put him in charge of watching his brothers and sisters. And so his father left, and several hours had passed. Him and his brothers and sisters, they were playing a game of tag, running around the house, when all of a sudden they hear the doorbell ring. So they all go up to the front door. They look out the window. There's nobody out there. So they're like, who was that? So they go back to playing. And after about 15-20 minutes, once again, they hear the doorbell. They go and look out the window. There's no one there. So they go back to playing again, and once again, the doorbell rings. So this time, Jim goes to the door, and he opens it, and he goes, quit playing around. He looks out there, and there is like absolutely no one. And he said he just remembered, like all of a sudden, this very bad stench just poured into the house, and he said it almost made him gag. And he thought, that's really weird, like there's no one there. So he closes the door, and they all go into the living room. Well, his brother goes into the kitchen and is in there for about 5 minutes when all of a sudden he comes running out, screaming, crying, and he runs right into his bedroom and jumps on the bed. So Jim goes to check on him and see what's wrong. And when he gets in his brother's room, he can see that like he's very frantic and just, upset by something. So Jim sits down on his bed and is like, hey, what's going on? Like, why are you crying? And he couldn't get his little brother to talk about like what was going on. He said finally his brother, after about 5-10 minutes, says, I was in the kitchen and I looked out the window. There was this big, tall, hairy monster, and it was waving at me to come outside. And right as he's telling him that story, Jim said he looked out his brother's window and he sees the shadow of something very large just move. And so he tells his brother, like, get out of the room, and he gets his brothers and sisters and he puts them all into the parents' room. But he said right at that moment, they could hear stuff like running around the house, and they could hear all this noise outside and banging on the windows and the doors. And he said, then it stopped.
And after about 5 or 10 minutes, he said he hears this frantic banging on the front door. So Jim gets up the courage. He goes to his father's office and he grabs his rifle. He goes to the door, and when he looks out the window, he sees that it's his neighbor. So he opens the door, and the neighbor comes running in and is all frantic and is like, "Where are the kids? Where's everybody? Like, are you guys all right? I'm staying with you till your dad gets back." And Jim was kind of confused, like, why is the neighbor here? Why is he panicking? Well, shortly after this, his father comes home, and his father and the neighbor go into the other room. Jim overhears them talking, and the neighbor is basically saying to the father, like, "I was looking out my window when I seen like several large looking men that weren't human running around your house. And I knew the kids were alone. So I ran over there immediately. And one of these things, whatever it was, it chased me." So Jim's father and the neighbor, they get some rifles and they go outside. They tell the kids to lock themselves in the bedroom. And he said all night long, they could hear just, loud bangs and booms, and shots being fired. And he said the next morning, his father came in, had this blank stare on his face, and just slowly shuffled onto the couch. And he asked his father, like, "What was that last night? Like, what happened?" And his dad looked at him and said, "I never want to speak about what I seen out there." And he said still to this day, he has no clue what it is that his father seen or what they experienced that night.